So you've heard Dr. K's take on what is a strategy, and I'm going to present to you a slightly different version that is quite compatible, but goes a bit more into the implementation of a strategy in terms of defining what a strategy is. But first, describing the four components of Dr. K's strategy. The question of what a strategy is, he identified that a strategy must identify what the arena is, where is the company going to compete, what is the unique value proposition that the firm will be able to offer relative to rivals is the second component. And the third component is what resources and capabilities does the firm have or need to have in order to deliver that unique value. And finally, the last component is what barriers to imitation are there that allow the firm to sustain that value creation over time? Well, I'm going to present you a slightly different framework called the Strategy Diamond. Like Dr. K's framework, the Strategy Diamond includes arenas. Where are we going to play the game? It includes differentiators. What is it that allows the firm to perform better than rivals? What is it that differentiates them? But what it adds are staging and pacing, which is how do we move into our strategy? We don't go from 0 to 60 in no time. What are the steps that we must engage in to get there? It's more of a journey. And the fourth component is vehicles, recognizing that there are some resources that we have and some resources that we need. And it pushes us to ask the question, how are we going to obtain the resources that we do not currently have? And all of this comes together to form the economic logic, which is how are we going to be successful? So to apply the framework, I'm going to use two mini cases of two different firms that entered the retail beer market at about the same time. But you'll see as we describe their strategies that their strategies are actually quite different, even though they might look similar on some dimensions. So the two firms are Great Dane, which entered the retail beer market a few years back. You may know them from restaurant fame. The second firm is Scani, which is historically a t-shirt company started by Troy Vossler when he lived in the dorm here at UW. You might have seen the Scani t-shirts, and those are all the sort of brand that they have. And again, the notion is they both enter the beer market about the same time, but I think you'll see that their strategies are extremely different, and the diamond's going to help us understand what's different about their strategies. So let's begin with Great Dane. Great Dane, as you know, is as a differentiator, is known for beer in the restaurants, and that is the starting point. That is what they are seeking to leverage into this particular market. That you will see is the linchpin of describing their strategy. As I bring this up to my students very familiar with Great Dane, they will often tell me that they are known for beer, but it's not always good beer. Perhaps true, but they are definitely known for beer, and that is the basis for them to want to enter the retail market in terms of this. Now, when we look at the arenas, it's not just that they're entering retail beer. It's that they're entering retail beer and trying to leverage the existing reputation that they have. That is a key resource and capability that they're trying to leverage. And that resource is most valuable near the restaurants. So as we look at the arena that they would want to go into, it's going to be in and around their restaurants, at least initially in terms of where their market is. But having said that, there isn't anything about the Great Dane brand, if they're successful, that would prevent it from even expanding to be a national brand should they be very successful. It's not impossible, but one would imagine that the resource that they're leveraging is more valuable in and around their restaurants in Wisconsin. Now, that in turn affects the staging and pacing that one would anticipate. So they are going to probably make their own beer because this is what their capability is. This is a differentiator. And there's a danger that if they expand too quickly, even though there is potentially a national market for their product, if they expand too quickly, then the quality may suffer. And that in turn not only will hurt their reputation in making beer, it will actually hurt their reputation in the core business, the restaurant business as well, which depends on their reputation to make beer. Next, we look at what capabilities they have and need. So in this case, they're able to make beer, but they're going to have to scale up, and they haven't been canning, and they don't have retail channels to sell into liquor stores and grocery stores and whatnot. And so these are things that they would have to figure out. And they have the question in terms of vehicles. Should they learn to can their beer internally, or is that something that they should contract with a supplier, an existing beer producer perhaps, to can on a larger scale? And in this case, and that is the question that you have with most vehicles, exactly how is it that you're going to acquire the resources? Do you need to have it in-house, or do you need to find a supplier for that resource? And in this case, they outsource the canning, they find partners for the channels, and all of this comes together to reflect the economic logic for Great Dane and why they want to enter the retail beer business. And it begins with what is their differentiator, and that's going to be that they are known for beer, and they're known for beer in and around their restaurants. Next, we look at Scani beer as an outgrowth of their t-shirt business. And again, we begin with the differentiators. And in this case, the differentiator is not that they know how to make beer. And in fact, they don't know how to make beer. They have only one resource that they're trying to leverage here. And that is, in fact, the Scani brand. And the Scani brand, as many of you know, is going to be linked to sort of a Wisconsin lifestyle. It is something that Wisconsin people tend to identify with. And that's important. It's potentially valuable, you can imagine, in selling beer. And that actually leads us to the question of the arenas, because unlike the Great Dane business proposition, Great Dane has their reputation that is built around the restaurants, but it could be national. There isn't anything about Great Dane that prevents it from being a national brand. That really isn't true for Scani, because Scani has value that ends at the Wisconsin borders. And so that means the arena is largely in Wisconsin, within Wisconsin. Then we have the question of staging and pacing. So in this particular case, whereas we looked at Great Dane and said, well, they're going to want to move slow because they're worried about the quality. In this case, there's virtually nothing that related to beer making that Scani has in-house. They're not trying to leverage that resource. And the brand is actually something that once they have suppliers for the components that they don't have in-house, then there isn't anything preventing them from moving fairly quickly on a campaign to expand the brand. But again, the brand will stop at the borders of Wisconsin. So then what is it that they need? Well, they need everything. They don't know how to make beer. They don't know how to can beer. They don't have the access to the distribution channels for the beer. But on the other hand, if they go and find a good supplier that they can work with, and they have found several, first Berghoff and then Wisconsin Brewing, once they have a supplier, the supplier can actually take over almost all of the activities for producing and distributing beer. And in fact, the supplier doesn't own the brand, and so that gives Scani leverage to sell the product using their brand, to realize the value of that brand in that market without owning all of the other complementary assets that they might otherwise need to own. So again, we see completely different strategy here, where they determine that they don't need to own most of the resources associated with it, so long as they own the one valuable resource that they're leveraging into the market, which in this case is the brand. And that leaves us to two completely different strategies, both entering the beer market. But you can see it begins with what is the differentiator, and that determines all the other components of the strategy. But until we have expressed all of the components of the strategy, we actually have not articulated the strategy itself. And that is the beauty of the strategy diamond. It helps us to ask the right questions and articulate the strategy more fully. So this brings us to the map of the strategic management process. What are the elements of strategic management? So now we have described what a strategy is, and you can probably see by the way we've described the strategy, what a strategy is, that in fact, articulating the strategy depends on an understanding both of the external market and the internal capabilities, and formulating the strategy involves finding a match between the capabilities that the firm has and the capabilities that the firm can acquire and the opportunities that it can find in the market. So the rest of the course, we will be focused on both the internal analysis, the external analysis, and then we have to look at how firms implement. So many firms fall down on implementation, and it's been said that implementation eats strategy every time. We will be focusing on that as well in this course.